Judging by what the Prime Minister has been writing for the papers this morning, she sees this week as a validation of her Brexit strategy. She is, in her words, proving the doubters wrong. In what possible way can that be true?
Oh, I think a couple of things. I think the Prime Minister has shown that she can get the deal for the United Kingdom. There were many people who, leading up to the agreement that was finally signed off by the Council on Friday, saying that even that wasn't going to happen and wasn't possible. And she managed to do that. And by being very focused on it and determined about it, we got a good deal for the EU citizens here in the UK, the right deal for British citizens. There's over 1 million British citizens working and living abroad in Europe, as well as getting a package that shows we can move on, importantly, to that next step, getting the trade negotiations going and the implementation period.
You're absolutely right. There were plenty of people who doubted that we would get to this point. The question is, at what cost have we moved on to phase two? I mean, even in the agreements that have been reached, there have been a number of missteps. I mean, take phase one. Last week on this programme and elsewhere, we were told by the Brexit Secretary, the Northern Ireland Secretary, that this was a framework, a memorandum of understanding. You know, the EU and the Irish government threw their toys out of the pram, and now we discover it's to be legally binding.
Well, we've said there'll be a withdrawal bill that will go through Parliament, probably at the back end of 2018. And that's also important because that's partly what also gives that certainty to the EU citizens living here in the UK about the settled status we're going to grant them. That's good for business. Business has certainty that the staff and the people we've got here contribute to our economy, know that they can stay, and businesses know they can stay. So I think it is an important part of what we're doing. And as we've said from the very beginning, these are about negotiations. Negotiations mean that you have to look at these things as you go forward.
But how do you reconcile the notion that what we've agreed on phase one, as regards EU citizens' rights, as regards the Irish border, so on, how do you reconcile the idea that that is now or soon to be legally binding upon us, with the idea contained in the text that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed?
Well, actually, you've got to judge us by what we said and what we actually do. And for example, with citizens' rights, not only are we going to be putting that into legislation with that withdrawal piece of legislation later in 2018, in the second half of 2018, we will start the process of giving settled status. We'll have that live as a voluntary scheme in that second half of 2018 before we've left. So very clearly indicating our determination to deliver and do the right thing, as we said from the very beginning, fulfil our moral duty as much as anything else.
But it's been a complete fudge on the issue of the Northern Ireland border, isn't it?
No, not at all. We've said from the very beginning, we are going to make sure that we respect not just the Good Friday Agreement, but the common travel area, which goes beyond Ireland, obviously. But what we do in terms of the negotiations, the trade agreement is important, and that comes in the next stage.
Yeah, but you've made promises to the DUP, you've made promises to the Irish government. One side has to be disappointed by whatever solution you come up with.
Well, actually, the reason I think that Theresa May is so perfect to be taking these negotiations is she's shown she's somebody who can bring everybody together. She's done that within the country as she's delivering what we're doing. She's certainly done it within our party, where we have people on both sides of that referendum. And I think she can do that on the more wider negotiations, including with Northern Ireland, to get to an agreement. It's what negotiations are all about, that works for everybody, a win for everybody.
Well, what you've got is a form of words that both the DUP and the Irish government can put up with. Now, actually, as regards, I mean, the border there, I mean, any solution potentially leaves you as Immigration Minister with something of a headache. You know, with a porous border, with people able to travel and goods able to move freely across it, I mean, how do you keep any grip on immigration?
Well, we have said from the very beginning we want to make sure that there is a frictionless border there. We're not going to have a hard border in Northern Ireland. That is important. But I have to say immigration and our work in immigration goes beyond the fact we have a lot of intelligence, advanced information. We also have that compliant environment that we're bringing forward.
I'm just talking about ordinary EU citizens who'd be free to travel to the Republic of Ireland. What would stop them from being free to travel to Northern Ireland?
Well, of course, they'll be able to carry on travelling through with a registration scheme through that implementation period. What we're going to do in phase 3 will obviously follow when we publish our immigration bill and our white paper pretty soon. Actually, the bill will be early next year. And we're waiting to see the feedback from the Migration Advisory Committee, that independent group of experts who are going to advise on immigration. You must have an idea of a
solution, though. I mean, you're talking very confidently about the fact that there won't be a back door to entry into the United Kingdom. So how do we plug that gap?
Well, two things. Firstly, as tempting as it is to go into detail before we publish the white paper, I'm going to have to ask you to just
give me a little Christmas present.
Be a bit patient just yet. Christmas isn't quite upon us yet, so there's still time. But also, to be very clear, immigration controls go well beyond that. So the work we're doing on the compliant environment, the right to work, the right to rent, the work with bank accounts and driving licences, all that means that people who are coming here legally will be able to prosper and contribute. People who are here illegally will find it harder to be able to go forward.
But clearly, immigration was the central issue of the EU referendum. And the longer that we have discussions like this, without any proper defined solution being described to people who voted to leave the European Union, you can understand why people are starting to get a little bit nervous. I mean, do you still believe that a net migration target of tens of thousands is possible?
I do think actually we can get net migration down to those sustainable levels, and the reason I think that is actually the evidence of what we saw in just the last roughly 10 days ago, the latest set of net migration figures, which showed the biggest fall we've seen on record, down by 106,000.
Still well into six figures.
But within that, what's important is the people coming here for confirmed jobs was up. The people coming here as entrepreneurs and investors, students, all of those were up, and a record number of passenger visitors. So it shows that we're delivering what business needs whilst getting control of our borders, and that's something I think you're absolutely right about. People want to see us get control of our borders.
But there is going to be free movement for years after March 29, won't there? Free, unfettered movement. Brexit, to a lot of people, will simply not mean Brexit.
Well, when we get to March 2019, that legal entity of freedom of movement as we know it will end. We will then move into a system where people will be able to move fluidly across from Europe, but there will be a registration scheme, which is an important part of the changes to lead to our future immigration system that will come in after the implementation period.
But in essence, hasn't Philip Hammond yesterday in China not essentially said, actually, it's status quo until the point at which we have that final deal struck? It's not the point at which we come out of the European Union that things will change significantly, is it?
Well, look, what we've been very clear about is we want to make sure there's no cliff edge, that business has access to the skills it needs, their economy can continue to flourish. And one of the things that's very clear when I talk to people who have felt very strongly about leaving the European Union, I represent an area that voted over 72%, is they want to know that that control is coming back. It is, and we're going to do it in an orderly way, in a smooth way, and that's why that implementation period is so important.
But March 2019 is for so many a totemic date. It is the point at which we are no longer part of the European Union. However, after that point, we don't still have to, adhere to their rules or operate under the jurisdiction of the ECJ. We've also got to accept any new rules that the EU imposes upon us. In what way is that Brexit?
Well, a couple of key points with that. Firstly, obviously we'll be out of those institutions, technically won't be a member of those.
We won't even have a say, we'll be a rule taker, we won't even have any influence in that process.
We haven't yet completed the negotiations around what that phase 2 implementation period will be, so let's not preempt that. So people preempted what would happen in the first round, and the Prime Minister proved them wrong and delivered. But also we've got to make sure we do what's right for the British economy, and within that we will do that in terms of, as I said, immigration will be different. There'll be a registration scheme which is part of moving forward to our final phase 3 position, which we'll go public with in our legislation next year.
On what you've just said, you think that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, who suggest that we will be a vassal state of the European Union, you think that he doesn't have Britain's economic interests at heart?
No, I'm saying something quite different. What I'm saying is I think the Prime Minister, the work that we will be doing as a government, will deliver to make sure that people, whether it's Jacob Rees-Mogg or anybody else on either side of the debate, can see that we come up with a deal that's good for the United Kingdom. And let's be very clear, the way that Europe works, most of the rules that are coming in over the next couple of years are rules that are being developed now while we are part of that process and we are contributing to it.
Just in terms of the withdrawal bill, the EU withdrawal bill, I mean, does the defeat this week signal once and for all that you don't have a working majority?
Well, we've got a very small majority in the House of Commons. That's a mathematical fact. It's one of the things that came out of the general election. What it does also show is actually we're making sure we deliver, because obviously we're at the very early stages of this bill. We are delivering Brexit. We will be leaving the European Union. The vast majority of things, when we were told there'd be lots and lots of votes lost, yes, we have lost one vote, but everything else has gone through. And what we're doing is looking at the results of that vote to make sure we can go forward and do what we can to deliver a unified position, actually where we can, across Parliament.
How do you feel when you see colleagues of yours, perhaps even friends of yours, being described as traitors, it being suggested that they should face deselection because they voted against the whip?
Oh, look, I wouldn't describe any colleague in that way, and I think some of the attacks we see on MPs generally, very much covered today, I think are unwelcome and unnecessary in modern life. Actually, particularly in Parliament with those. I know, and I've handled a bill myself which has had people on it on a different side to me and rebels in our own party, and they do that because they feel very strongly about something. That's what Parliament is about. Our job as a government is to work with that, listen to that, as we have been listening all the way through, to look at how we can make sure we deliver something that works for everyone.
But what do you make, though, of papers like the Daily Mail, to a lesser extent the Telegraph, clearly identifying those who voted with their conscience, admittedly against the whip, as traitors?
Well, look, I think we have a free press in this country, and different parts of the press can have different views about these things. For me, personally, these are colleagues. They feel passionate about these things. They've made a strong case about something. They've managed to convince enough people in Parliament to vote that way. We've got to make sure that we're listening to that. We respect the fact that they had these strong views. But ultimately, it doesn't change that core thing, which is that we will be leaving the European Union. We've all got to be very clear about the public did vote. We had a referendum. We have to respect that democratic decision.
Still, how is losing a vote on the EU withdrawal bill, how is that proving the doubters wrong, in the Prime Minister's words?
Well, what the Prime Minister's done is deliver that first stage of the agreement, got us onto stage 2, something many doubters felt wasn't possible. She's delivered on that, and actually, even with the bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, the core work in that to make sure that we leave the European Union, that we do it on the date that we set out in Article 50, all of that are things we're delivering on. And obviously the bill is at its early stages. We're not even finished it in the Commons, let alone in the Lords yet.
Minister, many thanks, and a Merry Christmas when it comes.
You too, and everybody watching.
Indeed.